America? As I'm sure you already know, not long ago, Pastor Terry Jones and his church put the Quran on trial, found it guilty, and sentenced it to this. Now, I've said before that I'm against burning books and that I disagree with the actions of Pastor Jones, but that's the great thing about America. We're allowed to disagree. I can say, hey, Pastor Jones, I think book burning is backwards and barbaric. And he can say, too bad, these are desperate times, we're trying to make a point. The reason people can discuss their differences and not kill each other in the United States is that over the past 2 centuries we've come to respect the free speech rights of all citizens. In countries that haven't learned to respect certain basic freedoms, disagreements often lead to violence and bloodshed, as you can see from the deadly protests in Afghanistan. This is why it's so disturbing that U.S. lawmakers are now apparently looking for ways to limit free speech about Islam. Senator Lindsey Graham recently said this.
You know, I wish we could find some way to hold people accountable. Free speech is a great idea, but we're in a war. During World War II, you had limits on what you could say if it would inspire the enemy.
Freedom of speech is a great idea, but not if it might lead to problems. As the mighty Patrick Henry said, give me liberty so long as it doesn't offend Muslims.
Anytime we can push back here in America against actions like this that put our troops at risk, we ought to do it.
The government needs to push back against free speech. Let me see if I've got this straight. The U.S. military and its allies are engaged in Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. One of the goals of this mission is to bring a lasting democracy to the Afghan people. Let's face it, we're trying to make Afghanistan more like the West, at least in terms of minority rights, women's rights, and so on. But according to Senator Graham, in order to make Afghanistan more like America, we have to make America more like Afghanistan. If we want to win Operation Enduring Freedom over there, we need to start Operation Enduring Sharia over here. Yes, if you want victory over the Taliban, just let the Taliban revise the Bill of Rights. Some people are worried that Senator Graham's plan, if successful, would be the beginning of Sharia in the United States. I hate to be the one to inform everyone, but we've already got Sharia in the United States. And no, I'm not talking about Dearborn, Michigan, where Judge Mark Summers and Judge Michael J. Callahan have ruled that police have probable cause to arrest a Christian, even if the Christian hasn't committed a crime and hasn't been accused of committing a crime. The Fourth Amendment no longer protects Christians from illegal search and seizure in the city of Dearborn. But right now I'm not talking about a single city. Sharia has already replaced part of the Bill of Rights of the U.S. Constitution. Sounds crazy, right? It would sound crazy to me too if I didn't know what I'm about to say. Let's look at a few video clips. Here's Secretary of State Hillary Clinton condemning Quran burning while speaking at a Muslim iftar dinner during Ramadan.
I am heartened by the clear, unequivocal condemnation of this disrespectful, disgraceful act.
According to President Obama, God is against burning the Quran, and if you pray about it, the angels will tell you.
And he says he's praying on it.
Yeah, I hope he listens to those better angels.
A few days ago, General David Petraeus, commander of the U.S. forces in Afghanistan, condemned Pastor Jones for burning the Holy Quran.
We condemn the action of an individual in the United States who burned a Holy Quran. That action was hateful, it was intolerant, and it was extremely disrespectful.
So, there you have it, the official position of U.S. leaders on burning a religious text. My question for Secretary of State Clinton and President Obama and General Petraeus is this. Do you think Americans are so dull, ignorant, stupid, slow-witted, and scatterbrained that we forgot about this little incident?
Bibles written in Pashto and Dari, the 2 most common Afghan languages. Bibles sent by a church to a U.S. soldier in Afghanistan. Bibles that were later burned by the U.S. government.
Who burned the Bibles? A bunch of Muslim radicals?
Burned by the U.S. government.
Who? A toothless hillbilly straight out of Deliverance?
Burned by the U.S. government.
The U.S. government?
The U.S. government.
But I thought only racist, intolerant bigots burned holy books. That's what I've been repeatedly told by the same government that burned these Bibles.
It was their best judgment at the time. The best way to deal with it was to destroy them. And I understand that they were burned.
Why would the U.S. government burn Bibles?
The leadership confiscated these Bibles so they could not be distributed here in Afghanistan.
I don't get it. Wouldn't the Muslims of Afghanistan welcome Christian evangelists with open arms on account of Islam being so peaceful and such?
A U.S. military spokesman tells CNN that kind of religious outreach could have provoked a violent backlash against Americans in this devoutly Muslim nation.
Interesting. You don't burn the Quran, because if you do, Muslims might go on a killing spree. But you do burn the Bible, because if you don't, Muslims might go on a killing spree.
Islam has a proud tradition of tolerance.
But why burn the Bibles?
The decision was made to throw the Bibles away, and in war zones, U.S. troops are required to burn their trash.
Ah, now I understand. You had to burn the Bibles because it's military policy to burn garbage. Would you like to know what the military's policy is when it comes to the Quran? I have here a copy of a Department of Defense memorandum distributed at Gitmo, explaining how U.S. soldiers are to handle the Quran if they absolutely must touch a copy. Check out the highlighted portion. Clean gloves will be put on in full view of the detainees prior to handling. 2 hands will be used at all times when handling the Quran in manner signaling respect and reverence. Care should be used so that the right hand is the primary one used to manipulate any part of the Quran due to the cultural association with the left hand. Handle the Quran as if it were a fragile piece of delicate art.
The Holy Quran, the Holy Quran, the Holy Quran.
According to U.S. government policy, you must handle the Quran with respect and reverence, as if it were a delicate piece of art. But feel free to burn the Bible, because that's just what you do with garbage. If you burn the Quran, the government will condemn your actions. If you burn the Bible, hey, had to be done. What's this mean? It means that the U.S. government has given the Quran a privileged status over all other books. They say it's wrong to burn religious texts, but their actions show they really only care about one religious text. This means, of course, that the government has violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. They're giving a special position to the Holy Book of Islam. And what has replaced the Establishment Clause? How about Surah 9, verse 33?
The Holy Quran teaches that
it is He who has sent His messenger, Muhammad, with guidance and the religion of truth, Islam, to make it superior over all religions, even though the mushrikun, polytheists, pagans, idolaters, disbelievers in the oneness of Allah, hate it. If you have a Quran, you might want to read this verse in context. Verse 29 commands Muslims to fight those who do not believe in Allah. Verse 30 condemns Christians and Jews and calls for our destruction. Verse 31 claims that Christians and Jews have abandoned pure monotheism. Verse 32 says that unbelievers try in vain to put out Allah's light. And finally, verse 33 declares that Allah will make Islam superior to all other religions. So our leaders are giving Islam the special treatment it demands.
A holy Quran, a holy Quran, a holy Quran.
This is why, even though the vast majority of religiously motivated hate crimes in the U.S. are directed against Jews, we're having hearings on anti-Muslim bigotry. Why are Muslims more important than Jews? Surah 3, verse 110 says to Muslims,
the Holy Quran tells us,
you are the best of peoples ever raised up for mankind. Muslims are the best people in the world. But who are the worst people in the world? Jews, Christians, and other non-Muslims. Surah 98, verse 6.
as the Holy Quran tells us,
verily, those who disbelieve in the religion of Islam, the Quran, and Prophet Muhammad, from among the people of the Scripture, Jews and Christians, and al-mushrikun will abide in the fire of hell. They are the worst of creatures. We're the worst of creatures. Muslims are the best of peoples. That's what this book says, and it's obviously the official position of the U.S. government. Oh, I'm sorry, should I be using my right hand, President Obama? I don't want the FBI kicking down my door.
And I consider it part of my responsibility as President of the United States to fight against negative stereotypes of Islam wherever they appear.
What Senator Graham is suggesting then isn't that we introduce Sharia into America. We've already done that. He's telling us we should find ways to expand the domain of Sharia. Come on, folks, it's already replaced part of the First Amendment. Why not finish the project and take out the free speech clause too? So, after fighting for our independence from Britain and vowing in the preamble of the Constitution that we would secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, after enduring a bloody war to end slavery and marching for women's rights, after defeating the Nazis and quarantining communism, America dies a quiet death under the knife of political correctness, leaving us with a strange, heterogeneous mixture of dwindling American greatness and Islamic supremacism.
A controversial art exhibit in Glasgow, Scotland is causing quite a stir among Christians in the United Kingdom as well as around the world. The taxpayer-funded display allowed visitors to write offensive remarks on the pages of a Bible. Gary Lane has more.
Muslims riot in Gojra, Pakistan on false claims that a Quran, the Islamic holy book, was desecrated. At least 40 homes were burned and 8 Christians murdered. Glasgow, Scotland, earlier this summer, members of the Zion Baptist Church peacefully protest the defacing of a Bible at the Gallery of Modern Art.
More than 100 people gathered outside the gallery to protest what they claimed was an act of vandalism. But for the most part, the church community here in the UK has been silent.
Unlike the Pakistan incident, there was no violence here, no murder or mayhem, no uncontrolled anger. But the Evangelical Alliance's Justin Thacker says gallery curators did receive some rude and offensive emails.
Now, there's no place for that whatsoever. There is a place, a rightful place for Christians to stand up and say, this is what we believe, and we don't think that you should scandalize the Bible in this way or deliberately seek to offend Christians in this way. But we ourselves must ensure that the way we make those points is gracious and not offensive in itself.
Most of the outrage over the defaced Bible was muted. It's part of an exhibit entitled Made in God's Image and was devised by a minister from a church that reaches out to gays and lesbians. Art gallery visitors were urged to write on the pages of the Bible and express their feelings if they felt they'd been excluded from it. And here are some of the things they wrote. On the first page of the book of Genesis, one woman wrote, "I am bi, female, and proud. I want no God who is disappointed in this." One person wrote, "The Bible is the biggest lie in human history." Another called God a fascist, and yet others wrote obscenities. The Glasgow Gallery of Modern Art responded to the protests by placing the Bible under a glass case. Instead of writing on the pages of the Bible, visitors were urged to write comments on sheets of paper provided alongside it.
A compromise solution has been found. The Bible's still on display, people can still write comments, but the really offensive, the really rude ones will now be kind of weeded out, and I think that's the right response.
The controversial exhibit came at a time when a recent report found that Bible knowledge in the UK is in decline. Only 1 in 10 Brits can name all 10 commandments, and young people view the Bible as old-fashioned. Some say the UK is losing its Christian heritage, while making concessions to the Islamic faith and the growing number of Muslim immigrants who live there. One official with the Catholic Church said he wondered if the museum and Bible exhibit organizers would have been so willing to have the Quran defaced. Gary Lane, CBN News, London.
School, it can be heated at best, and now the Islamic faith may be at the center of some arguments. Now, according to a new report, it was published in USA Today, some schools are granting Muslim requests for prayer time, even building in ritual foot baths. So would this be a violation of the separation of church and state? Let's find out. Joining me now, the president and chief counsel for the Thomas More Law Center, Richard Thompson, communications director for the Muslim Public Affairs Council, Adina Lekovich, and assistant communications director for Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, Rob Boston. Thank you all for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, let me go to you first. Is there anything wrong with creating accommodations for Muslims to pray in our schools here in America?
Well, right now it is. It violates the Supreme Court decisions starting way back in 1962 when Christians were forbidden from praying in public schools. In fact, as you may know, you can't even have a time of silence for prayer or meditation. They stop prayers at graduations. They stop prayers at football games. And all at once, the public school in California, Carver Elementary, decides that they can allow Muslim students to pray during school time, even being led by some teacher. I'm not sure whether she's an instructor or an outside person. My concern is this. We have a double standard, one for Muslims and the other for Christians and other religions. If you're going to have prayer in school, then you better have prayer for Christians and you better have prayers for Jews and other religious people.
Okay.
So my question is one of fairness and a level playing field, and stop this double standard.
All right, let's be fair and balanced. Adina, are Muslims advocating for special privileges that students of other religions are not getting?
Absolutely not. It would be a huge disservice to all Americans if there was school-sanctioned prayer, no matter which religion was being represented here. Schools have a responsibility to provide the opportunity for students to take care of their religious obligations, but it certainly shouldn't be school-sanctioned. The idea here of this school creating a entire recess period simply for Muslim prayer is not something that that I think most Muslims even support. Like in other situations, and what the district's attorney has even concluded here is that what the law accommodates for is for these students to be able to have a club and to be able to meet on their own time, but that it shouldn't certainly happen as a matter of school policy.
Rob, do you think this idea is reasonable, though?
What we seek is accommodation of religion in the public schools, not facilitating it. And I think that the analysis given by Mr. Thompson is a little inaccurate. Voluntary prayer in school is perfectly legal. Students can pray during lunch period, they can pray during their free time, they can read religious books. But we don't want that directed by school officials or required or mandated or anything coercive like that.
Okay,
and as long as we stay away from that, we'll be okay.
So then foot baths, for example.
Julie,
but foot baths, I mean, okay, so we're talking voluntary prayer is what Rob just said, Richard. Where do foot baths? Where do foot baths fall into all of that?
Well,
Adina, maybe you can explain. I want to hear from her because I don't understand exactly how it works.
Let's start with what it is exactly. Because for Muslims who pray, they wash their hands and feet and face before they go into prayer. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
Now, the idea of Muslims needing special foot baths in schools or in public places is absolutely not required in any way. I don't have a foot bath at home, and I certainly wouldn't expect there to be one in another place. Now, if a university or some sort of public facility seeks to provide that as a courtesy, then that's certainly their right. But we're not pushing for any sort of universal foot bath.
Okay. So Richard, you're saying this is not
a central issue in any way.
What Rob was saying about this being voluntary, you disagree?
No, it's absolutely. Let's look at the facts of Carver Elementary School. They had a special period. They went into a special class. Only Muslims were involved, and they were led in a prayer. That is totally unconstitutional right now. If you're going to do that, that's fine.
No
but
disagreement.
You better allow other religions to do that. Now, I appreciate the comments about foot baths because, as I understand it, for generations we've had Muslim people here in the United States, and they've been able to get along in the public school system without all of these special demands being made. And I'm concerned right now that these special demands are being made by certain groups that are using our idea of accommodation to get political action on these campuses, and it's wrong.
I've got about 30 seconds. Adina, real quick, and then Rob, I got a quick question for you.
I think that what we should be promoting, I mean, what the law promotes, the Equal Access Act, which was signed in 1984, promotes that clubs and groups should be able to meet on equal terms, whether they're religious or not religious. And, you know, and the school has to work out the details here.
All right. Is this a separation of church and state? I have to go. Yes or no, Rob?
I think that this can be resolved easily by remembering the voluntary principle, not having anything coercive.
Okay, guys, thank you very much. That's all the time we have. Rob Boston and all of you, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, Saudi Arabia and other...
So a new Wall Street Journal editorial asks a very pointed question. Why is it okay to mock one religion but not another? Quote, this is the take on it. In the consensus view of modern American liberalism, Bret Stephens writes, it is hilarious to mock Mormons and Mormonism, but outrageous to mock Muslims and Islam. Why? Maybe it's because nobody has ever been harmed, much less killed, making fun of Mormons so far. The Obama administration's approach to free speech is that it's fine so long as it's cheap and exacts no political price. This is free speech as pizza, writes Bret Stephens in an editorial that he wrote in the Wall Street Journal. Joining me now is Bill McGurn, Wall Street Journal columnist. He's also a former speechwriter for President George W. Bush. Bill, welcome. Good to have you here this morning. This piece got a lot of attention. It was one of the most read items on the internet. Talk to me a little bit about, you know, where Bret was going with this and what he's saying. He uses the musical Book of Mormon, which is very irreverent towards Mormonism, as a jumping off point here.
Yeah, I think anyone who hasn't should look at Bret's column, which is still up on the website. He focused on liberalism, Mormonism, and Islam, and pointed out that, you know, when you write a musical poking fun at Mormons, you win Tony Awards and you're celebrated, you know, for your daringness and your edginess. But that's not the case with Islam. When you produce a film on Islam, all of a sudden you get sheriff's deputies at your door and so forth, and you have the State Department apologizing for it and other officials naming you. It goes to show what another former colleague of mine once said: behind every double standard is a single standard.
Let's look at a quote that came out from the Church of the Latter-day Saints in response. They weren't happy, of course, about the Book of Mormon, which, as I said, is very irreverent. And if you need to see examples of what happens in it, you can read Bret Stephens' piece, some of which is, you know, he points out isn't really television talk. But they say, the Church of Latter-day Saints, the production may attempt to entertain audiences for an evening, but the Book of Mormon, as a volume of scripture, will change people's lives forever by bringing them closer to Christ. So I think that can be seen as a very sort of rational response. They speak on their own behalf, but they basically say, you know, this is not our style of entertainment.
Right. Look, it's not just Mormonism. It's evangelical Christianity, Catholicism, Judaism. These are the favorite subjects of attack, you know, from Hollywood, from, you know, much of liberal America. And not only are they attacked, you know, for example, when there was that Madonna splattered with dung at the Brooklyn Museum under Giuliani. I mean, they win awards and they get celebrated. It's amazing they get celebrated for their edginess and their daring at the same time they win plaudits and awards. But when it comes to Islam, they're silent. Now, look, I'm a person, I don't believe people should be writing things just to be offensive to religion. I don't think the answer to what these mobs that you're showing are doing is to insult the religion of Islam. But let's not indulge a lot of these fake pieties.
You know, it's interesting. In the piece, Bret points out, you know, he quotes who he calls the closest thing that Sunni Islam has to a pope, sort of a central leader. And he says that he praises Hitler for exacting divine punishment. I mean, he's asking for, you know, he's saying if Islamists want this kind of respect, you know, this sort of completely, you know, sort of perfect ability to never, ever be ridiculed in any way, should we not ask that they also return that kind of respect for other religions in a broader way?
Yeah, look, I think that we shouldn't even mention this film, which almost no one, you know, rioting across the Middle East has seen. Few Americans had even heard about before. It's not even clear there is a film. There's some very clumsy trailer. The whole thing is beside the point. There's a First Amendment right to make these things. It doesn't make it right to make them. But the larger issue is we're talking about a film when Christians and Jews are finding their fundamental rights violated all over the Islamic world in the Middle East, at least most of the Arab world, in Pakistan and Iran. And that's the real issue. And that's the real issue for the future of these countries. Can they embrace or protect minority rights?
And
so far it's been very difficult.
As you point out, of tolerance for Christianity in Egypt, for example, there have been, the estimate that I found was 86 Coptic Christians murdered.
Well, the churches
in Egypt,
are burned.
Which people hear very little about.
And I think the news coming out of Cairo, if I'm correct, was that the one synagogue is not allowed to hold services, or they're highly restricted. Look, there's a reason that Jews have fled their ancestral homes in a lot of the Middle East, and Christians are doing the same.
Yeah, Christians are fleeing Egypt in large numbers. Bill.
Newsflash. CNN has lost half their viewers in less than 2 years. In a last-ditch effort for survival, it appears that CNN has crossed the line from journalism to tabloid sensationalism. Such is the case with the recent Anderson Cooper 360 investigative report on a former Islamic PLO terrorist who converted to Christianity in the ways of the West. But instead of exposing current unreformed terrorists, CNN chose to blatantly smear and attack a reformed terrorist, reinforcing the cynical view that a growing number of people have that at CNN, no good deed goes unpunished. Waleed Shoebat assisted in the investigation by offering to give CNN his real name, since for security purposes he uses a pen name, along with passport records and a virtual treasure trove of information. But inexplicably, CNN chose not to accept that information. Instead, they proceeded with what amounted to a pseudo-investigation witch hunt. Let's examine some of their investigative and reporting techniques. CNN claimed they had asked several agencies about Shoebat's past. But on Anderson Cooper 360, Drew Griffin, the same reporter who did the first hatchet job on Sarah Palin, never released any interviews with any official agency. No interviews with any police official, government officials, or any recorded calls or any memos or any email correspondence that validate any investigation ever took place with anyone. Unless this is done, CNN has no case. CNN even twisted Mr. Shoebat's words. Listen to what Shoebat really said.
His message before a largely positive crowd of cops and emergency responders at this South Dakota Homeland Security Conference: trust no Muslim, especially those who organize.
Wrong, CNN. Shoebat never said such a thing, or else CNN would have showed it. What Waleed actually said was,
know your enemy. Know your enemy. All Islamist organizations in America should be the #1 enemy. All of them, the Islamist organizations.
Mr. Shoebat said to know your enemy. All Islamists and not Islamic, as Drew Griffin claimed. When someone uses the word Islamist, this would point to Islamic fundamentalists. Yet CNN wants to paint Waleed as a Muslim hater. CNN had further twists.
An ex-terrorist. It's Waleed Shoebat's claim to fame. A terrorist, a PLO member, who bombed a branch of an Israeli bank in Bethlehem Square, throwing a firebomb on the bank's roof.
Truth is, Mr. Shoebat never made any claim that he threw a Molotov cocktail on a bank, which completely debunks Mr. Griffin's entire investigation. Why would anyone remember such a minor event 30 years later? Mr. Shoebat had a real time bomb assembled by the notorious terrorist Mahmoud al-Mughrabi, whose account can be completely verified through United Nations reports and news agencies.
CNN's Jerusalem Bureau went to great lengths trying to verify Shoebat's story, finding the general location where the branch of Bank Leumi once stood, but not finding anyone who could remember a bombing.
Not finding anyone who could remember a bombing? Wrong, CNN. The United Nations documented that between December 24th and 27th, there were 2 explosions in that area. Additionally, on December the 27th, 1977, the Jerusalem Post reported an explosion in Bethlehem, in Manger Square, near the Church of the Nativity. And again, according to a daily newspaper published in Tel Aviv, Israel, Yedioth Aharonoth, on January the 2nd, 1978, An explosive charge went off outside the local courthouse. What is further damaging is that Walid sent all this documentation to CNN with an offer of witnesses who did remember the bombing. But when CNN realized that they did not have the hatchet story that they were so lusting after, what did they do? They stopped their correspondence.
There's another part of his story that doesn't check out. Shubat says he was arrested and spent 2 weeks in an Israeli prison.
There's no record of you being in prison. I think there'd be at least an arrest record. They held you for 2 weeks. Wouldn't the United States know you were in prison if you were a U.S. citizen?
Tomorrow, how about me and you go to the Muscovia prison and extract the records? The records are there.
Okay.
Would you be willing to do so?
We did, and the Israeli detention center could find no record of detaining anyone with the name Walid Shubat.
Wrong again, CNN. Even if Mr. Griffin did check prison records, he was searching the wrong name. Had CNN examined the records that they were offered, it would have proved beyond doubt that Mr. Griffin made an error intentionally. When Mr. Shubat was arrested, he turned in his U.S. passport and not his birth certificate or ID. His U.S. passport had a different last name. Mr. Shubat was born in Bethlehem, and since his mother was a U.S. citizen, he was under her passport as a child. When he matured, he held his own passport, which used his mother's information and is not under the name Shubat. Mr. Shubat's imprisonment can easily be verified with a click of a mouse, since Mr. Griffin was not the only one investigating Mr. Shubat's prison story. Journalist Eileen Fleming, who attempted to debunk Mr. Shubat's account on an opednews.com story, had interviewed Shubat's family and confirmed that Mr. Shubat was indeed in prison. Fleming includes an interview with one of Walid's relatives, Gamal Yonis, who Fleming claims had checked his facts with other relatives of Walid. According to Yonis, quote, in 1976, his sister Mona was coming home from school with her friends and were stopped and beaten up by Israeli soldiers. They nearly broke Mona's back. This made Walid very angry, and shortly thereafter he attended his first demonstration against the occupation. In 1977, Walid was caught distributing Palestinian flags and was arrested and held for about 2 weeks in Muscovia prison until his mother went to the embassy and got him released. But when he was in jail, he met someone who invited him to join a group against Israel.
I mean, you obviously can see why people are critical of your claims. There's a whole lot of gaps in your story.
There's no gaps at all.
We don't have a bank bombing.
And we don't have a terrorist, because it turns out Walid Shubat, even on his own admission, was never charged.
Wrong again, CNN. Mr. Shubat was not in jail for his bombing operation, but rather for planning civil unrest, in which he was released without charge since the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem intervened in the case. He later joined a terror cell in Jerusalem. If Mr. Griffin was searching court cases and terrorism charges, he would not find anything. Yet Griffin talked about not finding court records regarding imprisonment for a terrorism case of a bombing operation in Bethlehem Manger Square. It wasn't Walid that put gaps in Walid's story. CNN simply did another hatchet job. Honest reporting or dishonest reporting? You decide.
He is the director of the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University. Brian Levin. Brian. Hello, sir.
Hey,
how are you?
Good to see you.
Nice to meet you. Okay, so you're obviously the perfect person to have here today. You study this all the time, the mind of crazy people who do horrible things. I'm always interested to know how people like the people we caught today up in Boston can have two minds going at the same time. I mean, if you read what the older brother wrote on his on the internet, he said his worldview, Islam, personal priorities, career and money. And we see this a lot. I mean, the 9/11 hijackers went to strip clubs the night before they got on the plane.
But could I just interject? Look, it's not like people who are Muslim who do wacky things
have a monopoly on it. We have hypocrites across faiths. Jewish, Christian, who say they're out for God and they end up doing nice things.
You know what? That's liberal bullshit right there. I mean, yes, all
there are no
faith
Christian
is
hypocrites.
No, there are.
You made a career on that.
They're not as dangerous. I mean, there's only one faith, for example, that kills you or wants to kill you if you draw a bad cartoon of the prophet. There's only one faith that kills you or wants to kill you if you renounce the faith. An ex-Muslim is a very dangerous thing. Talk to Salman Rushdie after the show about Christian versus Islam. So, you know, I'm just saying, let's keep it real.
Well, I guess I have a girl for you, Pam Geller, you could maybe meet. No, I really disagree with you.
I don't know what that means.
Well, she's an Islamophobe. But I'm
not an Islamophobe. That's wrong. I am a truth lover. All religions are not alike. As many people have pointed out, the Book of Mormon, did you see the show?
No, it's hard to get tickets.
Okay. Can you imagine if they did the Book of Islam? Could they do that? There's only one religion that threatens violence and carries it out for things like that. Could they do the Book of Islam on Broadway?
Possibly so, but
possibly so. Tell me what color the sky is in your world.
Here's my difficulty with your premise here, Bill, and that is, look at how religions over history have had things done in their name that have been terrible.
Absolutely.
Right.
But we're not in history. We're in 2013.
Right, but what I would tell you...
You're right. During the Middle Ages, I would say Christianity was the bigger problem.
If I may, though, you are making an error in that Islam has over 1.4 billion adherents. There's a heterogeneity to it. Are there extremists who are horrible people who would slit your throats? Yes, but there are also folks that are fine, upstanding people.
Of course.
I'm very worried that you have a national audience where we're promoting Islamic hatred.
We're not. No, you're wrong about that. And you're wrong about your facts. Now, obviously, most Muslim people are not terrorists. But ask most Muslim people in the world, if you insult the Prophet, do you have what's coming to you? It's more than just a fringe element.
I disagree with you. I think what
you're wrong.
Well, I'll never be invited back.
No, you're invited back. We like debate here.
Bless you.
But wait, you know what? Let's get off this because I have so much I wanted to ask you. And we can talk about this another
We can agree to disagree, though.
We can agree to disagree.
My kid's dentist is not going to blow anything up, you know. If you look at all...
I don't know what that means either.
What I'm saying is my kid's dentist is a fine, upstanding Muslim. I have students... I
am not contending that your dentist is not a fine, upstanding Muslim.
I have students that are Muslim that are abused and victimized who are perfectly fine people. And what bothers me is for the sake of a joke here...
It's not for the sake of a joke. It's for the sake of the truth. To not recognize that one religion behaves differently and incites people in their religion...
At this time.
We live in this time.
Right, but there are also political, nationalistic influences.
Let me ask you some other things, because you're an expert on these matters. This person who did this, the older brother, said that he had not a single American friend. Why do you think that is?
Because he's a jerk. This is the most welcoming country in the world. You go to France, you go to England, and look how they marginalize their immigrant communities. We embrace them. Maybe instead of blowing up people, he should have tried to meet the Chinese student who was a student over in Boston.
Oh, good. We agree on something.
Yes, absolutely.
Today, the Middle East stands on the brink of full-scale conversion to Muslim Brotherhood fanaticism, yet President Obama does not seem to see the problem. President Obama's hand-picked director of national intelligence, James Clapper, said that the Brotherhood is, quote, largely secular, unquote. President Obama seemed unconcerned about the rise of the Brotherhood in Egypt. In fact, he invited Ikhwan members to his Cairo speech in 2009, tailored the speech to meet the Brotherhood's grievances and indulge his narratives, and cozied up to Muslim Brotherhood American satellites despite their involvement with terror groups all across the world. The Obama policy of courting the Muslim Brotherhood has not changed the brothers. It has empowered them to advance their anti-American program. They are now on the verge of control in Egypt and Libya, and their ideology dominates the Muslim world. But what is the Muslim Brotherhood? Well, in 1928, a young Egyptian educator known as the Guide to his followers and Hassan al-Banna to the rest of the world founded a group called the Muslim Brotherhood. The movement was virulently anti-colonial, but not because Banna was a nationalist or an Egyptian patriot. He was neither. Banna's loyalty was to the Muslim Ummah and the ideal that Islam must dominate across national lines. He was anti-colonial because he abhorred the West. The Brotherhood's development was spurred by Turkey's rigorous campaign of secularization. Following the final defeat of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, Kemal Ataturk had spearheaded a successful independence movement, expelling occupiers and establishing an independent state. Determined to turn westward, Ataturk drove Islam out of the public square and marginalized it in the classroom. In 1924, he abolished the caliphate, a symbolically shattering event for Muslims. Banna had drawn precisely the opposite conclusion about the sorry state of the Muslim world. For him, Islam was the solution. The problem had been too little of it, not too much, and not just any Islam. Banna had in mind a very particular brand, Salafism. The term Salafiyya comes from a phrase meaning righteous ancestors, referring to Muhammad and his companions. Banna believed that by mixing Islam with modernism, Muslims had strayed from the path. And the only way to restore the Islam of the founders was to faithfully implement divine law called Sharia. With Sharia's injunctions firmly in place, the Muslim nation would inevitably rise to the hegemony that was Allah's due. The Brotherhood remains the foremost power in the Middle East because of its credo. Allah is our objective, the Prophet is our leader, the Quran is our law, jihad is our way, and dying in the name of Allah is our highest objective. It's widely perceived to be representative of true Islam. In the late spring of 2011, the Mapping Sharia project published conclusions from an important study. After surveying 100 randomly selected mosques across the United States, the authors found that 81% of them disseminated Islamic texts that advocate violence. In nearly 85% of the mosques, the imam favorably recommended this literature for study by congregants. Moreover, 58% of the mosques invited guest lecturers known for promoting violent jihad. Now, this is the ideology of the Brotherhood, and this is the same Brotherhood that has dominated the so-called Arab Spring. It has played President Obama for a fool and the West for suckers.